If you have a limit and an integral, as modeled on this theoretical switchboard, can you legally swap their order? Is the limit of an integral always exactly equal to the integral of the limit? This is known as commuting operators. It is a convenient algebraic move, but without specific mathematical constraints, assuming these operations commute is unreliable. When dealing with sequences of functions, the baseline assumption is usually pointwise convergence. This means we measure how the sequence behaves at each individual coordinate. But pointwise convergence only guarantees localized behavior. It provides no global coordination across the entirety of the function. To resolve this commutativity crisis, we need a stronger geometric rule. We are going to isolate the exact mechanism that justifies this operator swap by relying on Walter Rudin's Theorem 7.16. Without a guarantee that these operations commute, calculations involving infinite series or continuous approximations cannot be considered rigorous. This diagram illustrates exactly why pointwise convergence fails. Here is a sequence of triangular spike functions defined on the interval 0 to 1. The peak height of the triangle is set to n, while the base width shrinks to exactly 2 over n. Because the area of a triangle is 1/2 base times height, the geometric area under this curve, its integral, remains exactly 1 for every iteration in the sequence, regardless of how n scales. Watch what happens as n approaches infinity. The spike becomes infinitely tall and microscopically thin, squeezing tight against the y-axis. Yet if you monitor any fixed point x, the function eventually passes it and drops to 0. The sequence converges to a limit function that is entirely flat. Here is the contradiction. The limit of our original integrals is 1, but the integral of our new flat limit function is 0. The failure is not in the limit itself. The breakdown occurs because pointwise convergence exerts no control over the vertical growth of the function across the interval. The area escapes into an infinitely thin vertical sliver. To find the rigorous solution to this problem, we turn to Walter Rudin's Principles of Mathematical Analysis. Theorem 7.16 establishes that if a sequence of integrable functions converges uniformly on an interval, then the limit function is also integrable, and the limit of the integral precisely equals the integral of the limit. The operative constraint is uniformly. Rudin constructs this uniform control algebraically using error terms, denoted epsilon sub n. Looking at equation 24, epsilon sub n is the supremum, the least upper bound, of the absolute difference between the sequence function and its limit function. By isolating the supremum, we select the largest possible deviation across the entire interval. Epsilon sub n serves as a global, worst-case scenario for the distance between the two functions. This single supremum value acts as the mechanism that prevents the localized vertical spikes that caused our pointwise example to fail. We can translate that algebraic inequality directly into a geometric boundary. Here is our limit function f of x. The supremum error term creates a shaded region exactly epsilon sub n units above and below the curve. This defines an epsilon tube. For a sequence to converge uniformly, every coordinate of the sequence function must stay entirely confined within this boundary.
In a pointwise sequence, an isolated coordinate could move upward indefinitely until it eventually collapsed. Uniform convergence, however, constrains the entire function simultaneously. As n increases and epsilon sub n shrinks toward 0, the tube physically squeezes the function. The geometric boundary collapses inward, forcing the sequence to map perfectly onto the limit curve. This provides the logical justification for integration. The area under the sequence function is now strictly bounded by the area surrounding the limit function. To prove that our limit function is Riemann integrable, we must verify that its upper and lower integrals are exactly equal. We use the epsilon tube to establish the boundaries. Because the limit function is trapped inside, its total integral must exist somewhere between the integral of the tube's upper ceiling and its lower floor. Rudin expresses this logic with a set of inequalities. The lower integral is bounded by the sequence minus the error, and the upper integral is bounded by the sequence plus the error. Returning to the graph, this means the maximum possible difference between the upper and lower integrals is precisely the total geometric area of the tube itself. The logic of the proof is now complete. If we prove the area of this tube goes to 0, we automatically prove the upper and lower integrals of the limit function are equal. Rudin calculates the maximum volume of that boundary right here. It is simply the total height, 2 times epsilon sub n, multiplied by the length of the interval. Because the sequence is uniformly convergent, epsilon sub n must approach 0. As it does, the gap vanishes. The upper and lower integrals converge, proving the limit function is Riemann integrable. With the bounding gap at 0, equation 23 is fully satisfied. The integral of the limit must equal the limit of the integrals. The commutativity crisis is resolved. Uniform convergence ensures the area under a curve is strictly accounted for and cannot escape into a vertical spike. This sequence logic scales directly to infinite series, as demonstrated in Rudin's subsequent corollary. Uniform convergence satisfies the requirements for the operator swap. The integral sign is now justified in passing through the infinite summation symbol. This theorem is a standard tool in approximation theory. It allows the integration of complex series, such as Fourier or power series, to be handled one term at a time. Uniform convergence creates a stable environment for integrals. However, these same constraints do not automatically apply to derivatives. While integration averages behavior over an interval, differentiation is highly sensitive to local changes. Even if a sequence of functions stays confined perfectly within a tight epsilon tube, their slopes, the derivatives, can still fluctuate wildly. Consequently, commuting a limit with a derivative requires even stricter conditions, leading to the requirements set out in Theorem 7.17. Identifying exactly when these formal requirements are met is what allows an analyst to transition from simple calculation to rigorous proof. To understand the geometry underlying these limit operations more deeply, trace the boundaries of these proofs within Rudin's text.